Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before we rank each episode against each other. And today's episode is Hannibal Season 2, Episode 11, Kono Mono. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So the episode begins with Freddy's, in quotation marks, Freddy's corpse being wheeled through a parking lot on a wheelchair while it's burning. And we then end up in the lab where it is revealed that dental records prove it's Freddy. And look here on the back of the leg, there's an incision. So this is all to convince Hannibal, who's there, that this is in fact Freddy's body. We then move on to Margot telling Hannibal that she is pregnant. And Will also is brought in to be informed that he has been used to create a pregnancy. And Hannibal says that he was aware of Margot's desire to get pregnant, unaware that she was going to use Will to do so. We then move on to Mason, who shows how not a good uncle he would be when there's seemingly a group of children having a tour of his stables, and he isolates a kid in the back who's in foster care and basically tells him that nobody loves him and he's going to be taken away from his foster family and he's never going to be able to see his mama or his kitty cat again. And then when he cries, he takes his tears on a tissue and then he puts that into his martini so he can drink a child's tears, literally. Will then dreams about the burning wheelchair before Alana comes over and visits, and she says that it's not a friendly visit, that she's there to convince herself of something. He realizes that she's there to convince herself that he killed Freddie Lowndes, which he claims he didn't. And then they get around, of course, to Hannibal, where Will once again is saying that he's dangerous. She has no idea what she's doing. And then he gives her a 9mm gun to practice with and not hesitate to use on somebody that she doesn't trust. We then see Mason having a session with Hannibal, where he first starts talking about his papa, and then Hannibal kind of brings around hinting at the fact that he's the sole Verger heir for now, but potentially another generation in the future could occur. We then move on to Freddy's funeral, where Alana has attended and Will shows up. They talk about how some killers will go to the funerals of their victims to relive the thrill, and then Will reveals that he's at the funeral because his psychiatrist, Hannibal, said it would be therapeutic, and this makes Alana walk away. Then Will and Hannibal talk about Will's feelings towards this baby and how Will says he's not attached to it, but he has the anticipation of attachment. Hannibal then reveals that while he hasn't been a father, he did have a younger sister, Misha, who he was the caregiver for, or she was his charge, so he likens that to having had a child, and how Abigail had reminded him of Misha. Before we then move on to a night scene where we see that Freddy's corpse and a few others had been dug up and put into the form of Shiva, which Alana identifies as being done by the person guiding the murder of Freddie Lowndes, and that it was brought up as a kind of courtship offering. Then, of course, we have Mason confronting Margot about her glow and being in bloom, and how he would like there to be a little verger from his own sperm, which are viable. And then we move on to Will and Hannibal discussing about the offering that was made, and then it moves on from Shiva to God and how The only thought that Hannibal really gives to it, though he's brought him up tons of times, is how his minor achievements pale in comparison to God's, essentially. We then move on to Mason having another session with Hannibal, where he goes on about how his papa would take him to fairs and pig shows, and how he had this little silver knife that he would stick into the backs of the pigs to test how deep the fat is, and how his father had also taught him how to stick Margot, but only deep enough to test how thick her skin is, but that Margot doesn't want to just stick him deep enough to test his skin thickness. She wants to kill him. And then he talks about the will his father left and how Margot found a clever loophole, as if she could have a male child that would be eligible to inherit. She wouldn't need him anymore. We then have Alana visiting Hannibal in his office after that, and once again they talk about Will, and Hannibal basically, as always, says he's helping Will and Will's making progress. He then kisses her hand and he smells gunpowder on her skin. He asks her about it. She says that she's been feeling paranoid lately. We then go to a scene where Margot is fleeing in the night, packing her bags into a car, and as she drives down the road, she is hit by a truck driven by Carlos, who then she wakes up in an operating room with Mason kind of hovering over her head, dressed as a surgeon, and he tells her that he has to remove the temptation from her, and that the official report's going to say she found an issue with her lady parts and the doctor recommended it be removed, and he, of course, sadly gave permission for that to happen. And then he leaves and the doctors come in, presumably to perform a full hysterectomy. And then Alana visits Jack, and she's warning him about Will and Hannibal neither being able to be trusted, and that she can tell they're all lying to her and playing a game, and Jack's going to lose. And after she's made her point, he then brings her through the FBI to where there is an alive Freddie Lowndes in the FBI, having confirmed that she faked her death. And she asks Alana how her funeral was, before we then see Will and Hannibal visiting Margot's suite, where she is unconscious post-operation. And then we see Will arriving at Mason's barn where all the pigs are, the human-eating ones. And he basically punches Mason, holds him over the pigs, and essentially hints at him that, guess what, Margot? You and I all have in common. Did you think it was Margot's idea to have a baby? Do you think it's your idea to kill the baby? Do you think it was my idea to come here and try to kill you over it? No, it's Hannibal. Hannibal's the one you should be feeding to your pigs. And then he leaves, and that is our episode. So now that we've been reminded what happened in the episode, we'll now rank the episode on our mostly objective ranking, followed by the personal ranking. So on the mostly objective ranking, we had a few different things happening. First, we of course have our multi-season supporting character developments. And that of course is the revelation that Margot has been successful in her hunt to become pregnant after her one-night stand with Will. But by the end of the episode, we also learn that that pregnancy has been removed from her and that she presumably had a hysterectomy. That's worth 3 points. We then also have the revelation that Freddie is alive after attending Freddie's funeral, which is also an event that happens. So with each of those, that's 3 each for a total of 6 points. We then have our multi-season main character development. This is where we learn a bit more about Misha. I think this is the first time Hannibal mentions his sister's name, as I can't think of anyone else he would have talked about it with other than Will, and he specifically tells Will her name. implying then that he hadn't told Will before. So I'm fairly certain this is the first time we're learning Misha's name, and that Hannibal likened himself to a father because she was in his charge when she died, and that she, through dying, had taught him a lot about himself. And then worth another 4 points, we of course have Will finding out about the pregnancy and loss thereof, and going ahead and attacking Mason. And then lastly, we have 3 points for an impactful slash memorable moment line, etc. And firstly, for memorability, the faking of Freddie Lance's death by having her in a wheelchair going across the parking lot while burning um, is pretty memorable of a scene. But it's pretty small, so it's not worth the full points all on its own. But also, I believe this is the first time Hannibal brings up his little teacup analogy, how sometimes he'll just let a teacup drop onto the floor, and he's always unsatisfied when it doesn't come together, and his hope is that one day a cup that he shatters will come back together and gather itself. And obviously, if we're going like metaphorical analogy, then he's hoping Will is the shattered teacup that's going to bring itself back together. But those two things together are worth 3 points. And then we, of course, have our negative messaging or behavior, which, of course, is the non-consensual body modification of Margot by her brother. Obviously, also, her brother is making kids cry and then drinking their tears in a martini, which is terrible. Um, and then, of course, there's Carlos purposefully ramming into Margot's car, causing an accident. And it's not an accident, actually, a purposeful car collision. Not a good idea. And even if I count each of those negative messaging and behaviors separately, that still leaves us with 11 points, which does make this a mostly objective 10 out of 10 episode. So that then brings us to our mostly objective rankings for season 2, and in first we have Kaiseki, Mukozuke, Shizukana, Nakochoko, Konomono. This episode comes in fifth because when more than one episode has the same score on the mostly objective, we rank in episode order. Then in sixth, we have Futomono, Yakimono, Suzukana, Ne, Na, it's an A at the end, Hassan, Sekizuke, and Takuwase is in 11th so far. So on to my personal thoughts. Obviously, there was a few different imageries that occurred within this episode. We had the burning wheelchair imagery, which is very memorable. Um, there's the shattering teacup and then the rewinding for it to come back together. There's a point where there's a stag man on a table between Hannibal and Will during one of their therapy sessions when they're talking about God and Shiva. And it, of course, grows the multiple arms to basically show up as Shiva. And then, of course, there's the corpses, plural, obviously, because there's multiple arms there, that use Freddy's fake corpse as the base to create that Shiva imagery as well. I did find it funny that when Mason's first came to a session with Hannibal, he immediately goes over to the couch to lay down and talk, and Hannibal's just kind of watching him like like doesn't know what to do with this guy before he invites him to come and sit, and then Mason from there on is sitting across from Hannibal. But I found it funny that he immediately went to like the cliche lay down while you're talking to a psychiatrist to do your therapy. I did also find that Abigail is mentioned a lot in this episode and brought up a lot. It's also brought up a lot how much Will would like to see her again and how he wishes time could be erased and she wasn't killed. And Hannibal saying what was done to Abigail was necessary. And basically, as we are rewatching, I'm not afraid of spoilers because this is an older series and it is specifically a rewatch. So it's most people will have seen it before, but we know that Abigail is being foreshadowed big time for a return, and that's probably why they have suddenly started to mention her in pretty much every session that they have. And then I also, as I was watching, I was kind of thinking, I wonder if Margot hadn't chosen Will to be the baby daddy, if she had chosen some random person, I wonder if Hannibal would still have felt the need to hint to Mason and to basically get Mason to end the pregnancy. Just because I feel like Hannibal, I think half the reason he did not want her to have the baby was that it was Will's baby. And, he and Will have that whole codependency, kind of moving around each other sort of thing going on. Fan fiction, in particular, really highlights how around each other they are. So I wonder if she had chosen someone other than Will, if Hannibal would have actually given those hints to Mason or gone a different direction with the whole thing, seen how it'd play out when she actually had the baby, see if she could like hide it. Like I'm just wondering if it hadn't been Will, had that baby had a chance. That is something that I wonder. Obviously, we'll never know the answer, but it was something that I thought about just as I was watching. But anyways, I felt like a lot happened in this episode, and I did find that it was a very interesting episode. All of everything seems to be coming to a head, all of the plots and counterplots. We are learning more about the Vergers, and they're getting involved in kind of a subplot to the overall trying to catch Hannibal plot that's been going throughout the season. And because I enjoyed it, I decided to give it a 9 out of 10. And that brings the season 2 ranking so far on my personal ranking to in first Yakemono, Mukazuke, Shizakana. This episode, Konomono, was in fourth, then Hasan, Kaiseki, Futamono, Suzakana, Sakazuke, Nakachoko, and Takawase is in 11th on the personal list as well. And that brings us to our final segment, which is our series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, we have season 1 ending with 83.85%. And so far, season 2 has gathered 93 points out of a possible 130. Then on the personal ranking side, we had season 1 ending with 66.92%. And season 2 so far has 95 out of 130. So with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Hannibal Season 2, Episode 11, Konomono. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.